Hello, I'm George. This is GLLR Cars, and today we're talking the Tesla Model 3. The Tesla Model 3 is a car that it's been reviewed considerably in YouTube, but just trying to look at a perspective from a person who has driven other Teslas and has driven other cars, and I try to go out and critique the car and find out what are the things that I like, what are the things that I don't like. I think everybody's seen how it's very slick, it's very aerodynamic, it's got these very nice door handles, frameless windows. It has the Sentry mode with the cameras all the way around, and because it is an electric car, it doesn't require a grille, so it's a very clean front look. I think one of the critiques that I have in terms of the shape, and for a car this small, it is a very nice looking car. My only critique is the rear view of the car. It's not my favorite. This could be a little polarizing for a few. I think it's just a little bit, maybe the window height is a little bit too high, and again, I know that the engineers at Tesla, they work really hard to make very slick looking cars, and the Model S is very, very slick. This one is just that. It may be because they're trying to get the most space out of it, and as a result you need to come a little bit high where that window comes down, so it kind of looks a little bit like egg shape, and I'm not probably the biggest fan of that egg shape. This is the dual model version of the Model 3, and it is one that has pretty good performance, knowing that these electric cars don't really have any lag the minute you press the accelerator. It's other than that, it's pretty much like any other normal car. I think the whole infotainment that gets pitched as their selling point, maybe that would have been the case about 5 years ago. I would probably say that today, with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, you really get most of those features. The interior is one that I really not a big fan of, because the interior doesn't really compete with some of the luxury vehicles in the same price category. It's very plain, and one of the things that I would say, just stepping back here, if I step back here, one of the things that I would say is that it is driver focus. So if I sit here and I want to do something like cool seats, but doesn't have them. Heated seats does have them, but there's no buttons for me to set it up. The driver has to set them up for me, and once it's warm enough, then I have to ask him to disable it for me. The air conditioning, it does have vents here that can be moved. The ones in the front are very fancy. They don't have these movable grills here to adjust them. Instead, what was done was, within the infotainment system, the giant screen is there, there's a way to adjust them by having air that pushes it in a different direction and moving where that's going to come out. Again, very, very fancy. Appreciate that. Sometimes it's all about, if you just want to get to it real quick, how would it be? But then again, the space is adequate. I would probably say, other than those small items related to, you really don't, your spectator back here, you cannot do very much here. Outside of that, it gets the job done. I had done a video in the past and didn't quite get a chance to be able to do a review. I spoke about the car, my impressions after the fact, but here in this one in particular, I get a chance to just critique the car firsthand. The first impressions is how smooth the car is. So when you, as expected with any electric car, when you accelerate, and it doesn't matter if you're accelerating it hard or not, when you're accelerating it, the response is immediate. But even if you're not punching it, because the response is immediate, there is a pleasurable experience of knowing that you move exactly when you need the car to move. So that's one of the first good impressions. On the flip side of that, one, I would say, negative impression is more related with the interior of the car. The interior of the car is very simple. It was made in such a way that you only have this big panel here in the middle, so you really don't have an instrument cluster. And because there's no instrument cluster, you have to be looking on the side. There's also no heads-up display. So there is a good view no matter what, but for being a company that prides itself in technology, Tesla should basically add more, I would say, gauges to the car. The other thing that is interesting is there are different modes in how the car can slow down when you're not pressing the accelerator. And this one in particular is set up to do regenerative braking to the point where I barely need to touch the brake and come to a spot when I let go of the accelerator. So it's set up this way to basically just recharge the battery, and it makes the range go a little bit longer, but it is different than what you're used to in a regular car, in the sense that in a regular car you're used to letting go of the accelerator and letting the car roll, and then only use the brakes to stop. This particular model is a dual motor Model 3, so it's basically one that's going to give you a little bit more punch. Well, not a little bit more punch, quite a bit more punch, and we're talking sports car territory. And when numbers matter, the numbers don't do justice. This car can compete with some of the fastest sports cars that you can pay more money for, if that's the thrill that you want. But one thing that we haven't talked about is the transmission, or the lack thereof. There is no transmission. So because it's an electric car, it doesn't have pistons going up and down inside a cylinder. What it has is an electric motor that has more electricity goes in there, it spins faster, so it doesn't need a transmission. There is no shifting. You just accelerate more, you pick up more speed. You don't have to wait for that thump or that change in velocity to get pushed back into your seat all the time. So that's very good. The other, again, I think most of my critiques are not related to the actual feel of the driving. It's more for what surrounds the driver. And what surrounds the driver, it's very, very simple. There's hardly any buttons or anything in the car, and that includes the ventilation and air conditioning. So there really is no button for, you have to, yeah, granted, you have to kind of touch it in there and set it up, which is kind of neat. Everything is set up in a very neat way, but in my view, the way that they did it from a central screen, it should have had redundancies. Yeah, I should have had a hard button to be able to just, you know, adjust the speed of the fan or the temperature of my air conditioner. One thing that is lacking also is the cool seats. There's no option for cool seats, and that's actually surprising. It is a car that prides itself in technology, yet it doesn't have that. Here's another big miss. There is no Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. When the person was showing me this interface, was telling me everything that I can do related to, let me punch it here a little bit. Yeah, this is very nice, and I wasn't punching it really hard. So what the person was showing me was the playlist and the music that can be streamed. I started to look at, well, I have my own music on my phone, and I just want to stream that. And the pitch was, yeah, you can stream it via Bluetooth. Well, that's very 1990s. You want to make sure you have Apple CarPlay, and the setup of Apple CarPlay becomes the setup of your screen. They were also telling me how nice it is on the Google Maps. Well, Google Maps is part of Apple CarPlay, and Waze is a part of Apple CarPlay, and of course Apple Maps. But Google Maps, being the more accurate one and the one that's being used the most, is available, and it has traffic information, and it has satellite view, and is being updated because your phone is being updated. So without getting too much into a rant, Tesla should offer a Apple CarPlay / Android Auto capability. All the cars have done it, and I understand where I think there's a holdout. I think that holdout is related to some of the features that Tesla sells as part of their services, because now they want to do software as a service for some of the features in the car. You can get from your phone already for free. Oh, well, I wouldn't say for free, for what you pay for your phone and the services and the LTE connection that you get from your phone. So I think it's redundant. I think it's just the company trying to make more money and holding on to dear life to the fact that in the future 90% of our infotainment will be how we mirror our phones to the car as we drive it. The advantage of being an electric car can be negated by the weight that is added to a car because of the batteries. So as I'm driving it here, one of the things that I noticed that this is actually a small car. So when you have a small car, you expect that vehicle to be very nimble. And I've driven other Tesla models, such as the Model S, and it is great driving in a straight line. But the minute you start making some turns, it starts to feel very sluggish. And they do, in order to compensate that, Tesla makes their the suspension very rigid, so it doesn't roll because of the weight that it has. But when it does that, the ride takes a beating if you're in it. So I know that they are pretty much mutually exclusive. The better the ride, the worse the handling. The better the handling, the worse the ride. So Tesla had no choice but to make the handling a little bit better because of the weight. The car would tend to roll, so the ride is not as good. I remember hitting a pothole on a Model S, and it felt so much worse than a normal car that's how I understood it. Another thing to keep in mind, that because the cars are heavier, they have a the tire pressure is run usually much higher than you would expect in a normal car, and that surprised me a little bit. So I haven't researched into are these different tires than usual to run them over, I don't know, 45 to 47 psi as opposed to your 32 to 35 psis. Not sure if that will be an issue because I don't own one. I cannot speak for long-term longevity and usability of it, but that's one thing to point out. So going back to this car, its size and how nimble it is, because it is smaller, it is much better at taking turns, and it is much better and again, the center of gravity is low, by the way, so it's not like it's going to just roll when you make a turn. But if you're used to a nimble, sporty car and you think you're going to get the same out of this, the reality is that you're not. It still drives very nice, but you just don't get the type of handling that you would feel in some other cars. It's not meant for maybe that audience, I would say. But like right here, I'm going in a straight line, so I'm going to go ahead and make a U-turn in the next available intersection here. So I'm going to crank it all the way. Well, the first thing is the turning radius is actually pretty bad. I nicked the third lane on a small car like this, but it wasn't fast enough for me to feel what the turn is. Here I get to do just turning onto a street here. It wasn't so bad. I would say that it's because of the low center of gravity, it wasn't able to hold its own. It didn't roll very much. But and even though the car is not very low to the ground, most of that weight is on the battery, so it would feel like it were low to the ground. You actually sit pretty high on there, and your visibility is pretty good. The visibility here, you can see the ground pretty close in front of you. Visibility out back is decent. I don't think is extremely good. Of course, you have this glass in front of you, like right above you and around you, but it is tinted, so it's not too bad. But all in all, I would say that this car is a car that I wouldn't mind driving as a daily driver or even a commuter, mostly for like a commuter, knowing that yes, there's some disadvantages, but it is our job to point out those disadvantages and hope that manufacturers such as Tesla will cater to what the customers will be asking for, which is give us more compatibility with things like Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Give us the ability to see gauges in front of us, head-up display, cool seats, rain sensing wipers. I mean, as you start thinking about everything that some luxury vehicles of the same price have, this car is lacking many of those features. It does have the concept of profiles to save your seating position, your mirror positions, just like some other cars. but you have to dig through menus to do that. Whereas a car that has separate buttons for it, you can just sit on it, adjust it by hitting those buttons, and you're ready to go. So here you have to basically be stopped, even if you know where the menus are, even if you're completely familiar with the menus, it's still going to take a little bit of time to do it. Then again, if you're the only driver and you're not sharing those settings with anybody else, then maybe that's not a big deal. But overall, it drives very well. So what would be my biggest critiques for this car? My biggest critiques for a car like this would be Tesla's unwillingness to embrace the mirroring capabilities of Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, its inability to set up things like instrument clusters that are in front of the driver, heads-up display, set up more manual controls like volume controls, air vent controls, and cool seats for, well, it doesn't have to be in the back, but at least controls for people in the back, that if you're going to offer heated and cool seats, at least they have the capability of pushing those buttons and doing it themselves. Outside of that, the camera system, the self-driving capabilities, no question, hands down the best out there. When it comes to battery capabilities, one of the pioneers. When it comes to range, one of the best out there. It's got the best range as well. So nothing against that. It's an excellent car from that regard. I will probably say, again, it's still a very small company. As they get bigger and their profit gets better and they have more experience under their belt of doing these cars, I would expect that they would improve and they would offer some of these smaller or minor things that I'm really ranting about here. But other than that, it's a very good drivable car. It's a car that does give you a very unique driving experience because of it is an electric car. And I think this is probably true for all electrics, but nevertheless, it is a different driving experience because of that. I guess the only and maybe last negative or con regarding the car is not because it's a Tesla, but it's inherent to all of these electric cars, and that is the time that it takes to recharge an electric car. Those batteries, it's just the nature of it. It takes a while. The BMW Model 4, the BMW 4 Series that I drive is a car that I've timed it, and guys, it depends on the gas station, but I average about 72 seconds to go from 0 to 100 on my gas tank. It's a long ways from what this is going to be able to do, but again, I wouldn't expect that. I think for a commuter that you charge at night, that's probably just fine. I'm just hoping that it gets a little bit closer to what the refueling times or the gas engine can do. So that's more technology driven. But all in all, those are the basically quick rundown of what I like and don't like about the Tesla Model 3. My name is George. This is GLLR Cars. And as always, drive safe.